Objective 6, describe the energy flow among populations through food webs and ecological pyramids. So what is a food web? This is all of the food chains in an ecosystem. It is all the interconnecting paths of energy flow in an ecosystem. It describes all the feeding relationships that exist in that ecosystem. You have grazing food webs that start with the producer and then it moves through the different levels of consumers. And then you have a detrital food web that starts when the organism dies. And some of the members of the detrital food web can be part of the food that feeds the above ground carnivores. So these two different types of food webs, detrital and grazing, are actually connected to each other. Here you can see how they're connected. It's showing down at the bottom the detrital food web. Okay, look, you've got fungi, and bacteria in your detritus. And when these other organisms die, they're going to start to work. And then that will be food for invertebrates and carnivorous invertebrates and salamanders and shrews. And then the shrew gets eaten by the skunk. You can see also you've got the grasses and stuff there, and the trees, the nuts, the leaves, all those things. That would be your producer level, your autotrophs. And then your herbivores would be what eats that. The mice, the rabbits, the chipmunks, the deer. All of those are producers. And then they get eaten by the first level consumer. And then a second level consumer eats the first level, and so forth. So you can see there the chipmunk, that's a first level consumer, or excuse me, yes, a first level consumer. It ate the nuts. It's going to be eaten by the hawk, or by the owl, or by the fox, or the snake. Okay? So those would be the second level consumer. So you see, it's all the food chains are interconnected, and it's showing all of the feeding relationships in that ecosystem. Now when we talk about energy flow, looking at the grazing food web, it starts with the producer. The oak tree has leaves, okay? And then insects and rabbits and deer and caterpillars eat those leaves. And birds and chipmunks and mice eat, not only birds do, but chipmunks and mice also, they would eat the fruits. But the birds eat the nuts and the fruits, and it might eat insects and caterpillars, okay? So then you've got, of course, the hawk that eats the birds. So you can see down there at the bottom a simple food web. It's our food chain. It's going from the oak tree leaves, get eaten by the caterpillar, get eaten by the birds, get eaten by the hawks. And of course, like I said before, birds and some other organisms are omnivores because they don't just eat the fruits and nuts, they also eat the caterpillars. Okay, now looking at the detrital food web, you see one down at the bottom. It starts with detritus, then the earthworms eat that, and then the salamanders eat the earthworms. Detritus is food for soil organisms, in this case the earthworm. And then the carnivorous invertebrates will eat the earthworms. And they also may be eaten by shrews and salamanders. So this detrital food web could become food for the carnivores that live above ground. So that's what shows how the two detrital and grazing food webs are joined together. So more energy in the forest comes from actually funneling energy through the detrital food web than it does through the grazing food web. Now, what are trophic levels? These are just feeding levels. It's you got a food chain. That's a single path of energy flow. What we've been looking at with the leaves and the caterpillar and the birds and the hawk. Okay, that's a simple food chain. Trophic level, that's the feeding level within this food chain or within a food web. And what it does, the trophic level contains all the organisms that feed in that level of the food chain. So we're talking about producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and on up the pyramid. Now, ecological pyramids. As I mentioned before, only about 10% of the energy at one feeding level, at one trophic level, is available to the next trophic level because they're going to give off 90% of it as heat. Okay? So it would be beneficial to eat further down on the bottom of the pyramid. That's why you can't have a lot of top carnivores supported by a food web. You're only going to have one owl or one hawk. You're not going to have 10 owls and 10 hawks because they're not going to get enough energy to be able to survive. You're going to have more at that first consumer level, that primary consumer level, than you are at the secondary consumer and at the third tertiary level consumer. So it kind of comes out to look like a pyramid, and that shows the flow of energy, and it shows that you have large losses of energy, as much as 90% is going to be lost at each trophic level. You can look at it as not just an energy pyramid, but you can also look at it by looking at the biomass. This is an example of one that shows biomass. You see the bottom level, the autotrophs, you got 809 grams per meter squared of autotrophs. But look at your first level consumers, your herbivores. It's dropped to 37. And then the second level consumers, your carnivores, has dropped to 11. And then those top carnivores, 1.5 grams per meter squared. So you can't support as many of that top level carnivore as you can down there at the herbivore level. So you see how it's losing so much of the energy at each level to the environment as heat.